When a billionaire's crisis strikes, one cleaner's daring action reveals an unexpected transform. Carlos adjusted his cleaning cart, anxiety knotting in his stomach as he caught sight of the chaos swirling through the glass-paneled offices of Neptune Industries. The usually pristine hallways buzzed with frantic executives whispering conspiratorially, their refined attire starkly contrasting with the unassuming gray of his janitorial uniform. Lucas Drake's empire stood at the cliff's edge. A catastrophic cybersecurity breach threatened everything. It felt surreal to be standing among them. He was invisible, merely a cog in the machine, until now. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Take pride in your work, Carlos. Every job matters." Yet within him brewed a sense of dread as he recalled each sidelong glance and dismissive comment. Would they ever see his worth? Would they even care if he vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but gleaming floors for them to tread upon? The disparity felt like a chasm. He polished glass surfaces, his reflection giving him a momentary glimpse of the man he longed to be. A man whose contributions extended beyond scrubbing floors or picking up their discarded takeout boxes. But the fear loomed heavier than the weight of his cleaning supplies. "What do you think you could do, Carlos?" Rick, the building's security chief, asked with a raised brow when Carlos finally summoned the courage to voice his thoughts. His heart raced as self-doubt seeped in, wrestling with the glimmer of opportunity springing forth. The insatiable hunger for a better future gripped him. His daughter Mia needed college tuition, and he could sense the clock ticking endlessly toward that day. Could he truly put himself on the line and risk his already fragile employment status? Would the skills he honed in those late-night classes matter in the grand scheme of this crisis? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the clock ticked relentlessly, Carlos leaned against a wall, envisioning his family's struggles. The rent, utility bills, grocery expenses. Memories of his father, sweat-drenched and weary, struggling to provide, fueled the fire within. Could he reconcile that sense of pride with the betrayal of pursuing something so different from what he'd known? In that span of mere moments, as executives panicked and chaos reigned, he felt the urgency pulsing through his veins. What if he failed? The seconds melted into a maddening reminder of everything at stake. Could he clutch this chance for transformation, or would he retreat into his old life? The stairs leading to his future felt steep and climactic, each step demanding resolve. Carlos could see the digital clock in his mind, counting down to closure and crisis. If only he could ignore the voice whispering doubts in the back of his mind. If only that aching reality would cease its suffocating grasp. Neither the workers above him, nor the billionaires who distanced themselves could deny his presence any longer. He wasn't just a cleaner. He was someone who dared to bridge the divide. Would he risk it all and push against the crushing weight of convention to discover who he could become? As the company teetered on the brink, a sliver of possibility beckoned to him from the shadows. The chaos continued to swirl around him, but for the first time, Carlos stood firmly between two worlds, the world of the invisible worker and the realm of urgent decision-making occupying the executive floors. Rick was still waiting for a response, his skeptical eyebrow raised in challenge. This moment demanded more than he had ever given. It was no longer just about sweeping floors. It was about tapping into an inner strength, a depth of understanding that had been forged through years of hard work. Forcing himself to breathe, Carlos recalled the training he had endured in his late-night classes, the long hours spent studying corporate communication and data analysis. Could those seemingly trivial lessons be applicable to a crisis of this magnitude? He couldn't shake the thought of his father's pride when he revealed his determination to pursue education against the odds. "Maybe I could help with the IT team," he stammered, words tumbling out in a rush. Every part of him wanted to shrink back into obscurity, yet something pushed him forward. "I've learned some skills that might be useful." Rick's expression momentarily softened, perhaps sensing the understated fury of potential brewing beneath the facade. "Tell me more. What do you know about cybersecurity?" As he spoke, Carlos felt a surge of confidence ignite within him. He detailed concepts and strategies he had absorbed through relentless blogging and forums that consumed his off hours. The excitement in Rick's eyes fueled his own enthusiasm. He realized with each word that he was not just trying to prove himself. He was claiming a stake in a world that had always just been out of reach. But doubt crept in again. Why would they listen to a cleaner? How easily could those words be dismissed? Rick could laugh him off in an instant. Just then, a sharp cry echoed through the office, sharp enough to shatter his resolve. "We need someone to get into the server room and figure out what information has been leaked," shouted one of the engineers who had been pacing nervously, panic matching the urgency of the situation. Carlos could see a flicker of desperation dance in the chaos. What if that someone could be him? The thought rang like a bell in the depths of his mind. The adrenaline surged. He took a step forward, voice steadier than he felt. "I can do it. I know my way around the system. I can help identify the entry point." Rick turned to him, clearly weighing the possibility. The tension in the air thickened, heavy as a storm cloud. "Are you sure? This isn't just cleaning up your sweet spot." "I am sure," Carlos replied, feeling the resolve crystallize within him. But even as the words left his mouth, he felt the implications digging deep. If he succeeded, would he finally be seen as more than just a cleaner? Would he claim his right to redefine his existence? If he failed, he would risk everything: his job, his dignity, and the good opinion of his daughter. "All right," Rick said, a hint of respect in his tone. "We need a solution, and we need it now. Let's get to work." Carlos felt a pulse of energy surge through him. This was his opportunity, the one he had dreamt of yet never grasped. Something far beyond the expectation of serving. As Rick led him toward the server room, self-doubt and fear intertwined, but beneath them was a determination that ignited his very bones. The door swung open, revealing a world of blinking lights and humming machinery. Carlos stepped inside, a sense of purpose washing over him. Behind him, the crises of others cranked into high gear. But in this moment, it was solely about him transforming from silence to action. He inhaled deeply, scanning the familiar yet daunting landscape of hardware. This was it. He was crossing a threshold. A single realization dawned. He would not just clean this mess. He would confront it, head on. In the stillness of that room, Carlos was ready for the challenge, but as a wave of uncertainty washed over him, he grasped one last thought. What awaited him beyond this moment might be just as terrifying as the crisis he was stepping into. Could one act of courage redefine everything? As the lights flickered ominously, a new wave of questions filled the air. Would he be able to uncover the truth before it shattered the very foundation of Neptune Industries? The server room was alive with a low hum, a mechanical heartbeat that pulsed with urgency. Carlos stepped deeper into the fray, his eyes darting over the tangled cables and flickering screens, where lines of code raced like whispered secrets. He felt a strange dissonance between the cacophony of chaos outside and the quiet resolve forming within him. Each keystroke, every flick of his wrist, would steer the course of something far greater than himself. Okay, what's the first step? Rick's voice pulled him from the clutches of uncertainty. Carlos nodded, steadying himself. Let's start by tracing the access logs. I can identify patterns, see if there's an anomaly. As he took control of the keyboard, his fingers danced over the keys, instinctively recalling lessons from his courses. Years of feeling overlooked could not define him in this moment. This was the culmination of hard work, and now it served a vital purpose. As he dove into the logs, an unnerving thought bubbled to the surface. What if he wasn't skilled enough? Memories of being scoffed at by others crept in, but he flung them aside. His heart raced. He had to trust his training, his instinct, and more importantly, himself. Each click and scroll reaffirmed his reclamation of agency. He could do this. Several minutes passed, the silence between him and Rick punctuated only by the frantic tapping of keys. "There!" Carlos exclaimed, pointing to a line of data that didn't fit. "This entry here was made outside of office hours, from an IP address we don't recognize. It's likely our point of entry." Rick leaned in, studying the screen, a recognition dawning on his face. "Good catch. We need to lock down everything from that IP. Maintain control until we know what they accessed." Nodding, Carlos felt the adrenaline rush through him again. He adjusted parameters, carefully establishing a digital barrier, a fortress around their data. With each keystroke, he watched the encrypted walls rise, providing them a moment of security and clarity amidst the chaos. But clarity came with its own shadows. His mind raced with questions about the motivations behind the breach. Who wanted to harm Neptune Industries? How far did this conspiracy extend? Would he become one of its casualties, or would he stand to protect everything he held dear? "Let's start isolating the affected systems next." Carlos indicated a few options on the screen, his voice steady but internally a storm brewed. The gravity of what he was doing hit him like a tidal wave. His role was no longer invisible. He was now the defender of information and the future, both his own and that of his colleagues. Rick took a step back and looked at Carlos, his expression shifting from skeptical to impressed. "You're really handling this well, Carlos. I didn't see this coming." A flicker of pride sparked within him. For once he felt seen, recognized not as a cleaner, but as a skilled professional, one who could make a difference. Yet a nagging fear crept at the edges of his consciousness. What would happen once the chaos subsided? Would they simply return to the status quo where he was invisible again? Suddenly, the lights flickered ominously, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When they returned, an error message flashed ominously across the screen. Carlos's heart plummeted. The system had locked them out. "I can't access the logs." Panic threatened his focus. "Stay calm." Rick's voice came like an anchoring force, yet their situation felt tenuous, precarious. "We need to think critically. What's the failsafe?" Carlos racked his brain, scrambling for any knowledge that could save them. It was a desperate situation, the kind that tested everything he had learned. The weight of critical responsibility pressed on him. It was more than solving a technical glitch. Lives, careers, reputations were on the line. He turned to Rick with determination set in his brow. "We can reset from the backup. I can brute force the system access if needed." Just as he uttered the words, Carlos realized this moment would not just test his skills, but rattle the very foundation of his identity. Who would he become on the other side if he succeeded? As adrenaline coiled within him like a coiled spring, the reality dawned. This was no longer merely about the system or the company. It was about redefining every notion he held about destiny and choice. As Carlos prepared to dive into the heart of the challenge, he felt the air thicken with anticipation. This was more than a job. It was an awakening. Yet lurking behind every surge of hope was the fear that failure could cost him everything. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing resonated clear. The stakes were astronomical, and as the clock ticked down, he understood that reclaiming his power would demand everything he had. Would he rise to the occasion or crumble beneath its weight? With a deep breath, Carlos's fingers hovered over the keyboard, adrenaline fueling each pulse in his veins. The backup system was his only lifeline, a flicker of hope entwined with the fear of failure. Could he really crack the code, and what would that mean for who he was? The air vibrated with uncertainty as he plunged into the complexity of the task. He recalled the intricate lessons from his courses, the theory of layers of security that he now needed to peel back methodically. "Okay, first," he murmured to himself, "retrace the failsafe protocols." As he entered commands, he felt the familiar wave of anxiety rush in, but this time he flipped the script in his mind. Instead of viewing his nervousness as a hindrance, he recognized it as a call to action. It was his moment to shift the narrative of who he was, from the overlooked cleaner to a defender of the digital frontier. Rick leaned closer, eyes widening at the rapid sequence of actions unfolding on screen. "Man, you've got the skill set for this," he said, his tone shifting from caution to a hint of admiration. Carlos felt a twin surge of elation and pressure. The validation he craved was materializing, but the stakes were now higher than he ever envisioned. Would telling himself he was capable alter the outcome? Would any amount of recognition make a difference when the threat loomed so large? Just a couple more adjustments. Carlos reassured Rick, even as self-doubt swirled. He'd spent too long underestimating his worth. But now, as he observed the metrics changing on the screens, clarity washed over him. His dedication had equipped him for this very moment. Learning was meant to be applied, not just stored away like a distant memory. "Got it," Carlos exclaimed. The backup screen blinked to life, displaying vital system logs. He began correlating the entries with the suspicious activity they'd traced moments ago, his thoughts racing. Each connection he made felt like stitching together pieces of a sprawling puzzle. But as the data revealed more anomalies, unease rippled through him. The entries weren't just random. They seemed coordinated, an attack on the entire infrastructure. Why would anyone target them? Who stood behind this? That flicker of doubt was quashed by a mounting sense of duty. As Rick glanced over his shoulder, Carlos caught a glimpse of fear masked by professionalism reflected in Rick's expression. "Carlos, we need to escalate this," Rick said, gripping the edge of the desk. "We might be facing something bigger than just a breach." His heart raced, the thought of being part of something larger, something incredibly significant that could impact not only their jobs but the entire company weighed heavily. Yet it also ignited a fierce determination within him. This wasn't merely a defensive maneuver, it was a stand. "Let's detail this out," Carlos replied crisply, projecting confidence. They would document the retreating pathways of the intrusion, outlining their findings so management could grasp the gravity. Confidence surged through him with every keystroke. The dark cloud of invisibility began to fade. He was no longer just the person whom others dismissed in the past. He was willing to face the unknown. Just as they finished compiling their report, the lights flickered ominously again, casting long shadows across the room. An alert blared from a nearby monitor, its tone sharp and immediate. Carlos's focus snapped back to the screen. Someone was attempting to bypass their defenses in real time. "Rick, I think we're being targeted right now." Panic gripped the air, but the storm within Carlos settled into a steely calm. The fear transformed once more into a singular focus, to confront the breach head-on. He flicked through screens, analyzing the incoming data with relentless resolve, refusing to shrink back. This was his moment of truth. "Redirect resources to counter the infiltration," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. Carlos felt a rush of affirmation surging through him. This was more than just a crisis. It was a test of faith in his abilities, an expedition into the hidden depths of his courage. Whatever lay ahead, he would tackle it with everything he had. Could he really manage to protect their world and finally step into a role that demanded visibility and respect? Would his efforts bear fruit, or would he risk everything in his desire to break free from the shadows? As they braced for countermeasures, the tension cracked in the air, resonating a moment of truth. The confrontation had begun, and the results would define not just the fate of their company, but who Carlos truly was destined to become. Carlos focused on the screen, heart racing as inputs from their monitoring system flooded in. Adrenaline-pricked fingers danced across the keyboard, each key press resonating with the static charge in the room. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a battleground where intellect met malice. Each second counted, and there was no turning back. "Silence. Just let me think." Rick's anxiety peaked, layering another urgency on top of Carlos's own. He had to recover the narrative, assert leadership in a crisis that could quickly spiral. Sifting through the data aimed at compromising their system, he felt a profound shift within. He was no longer merely reacting. He was strategizing. This was the crucible in which he would forge his identity. "Let's isolate the attack origin," Carlos blurted, and Rick nodded, fueled by the certainty now radiating from Carlos. They had briefly touched the realm of collaboration, but this moment demanded clarity and purpose. By anchoring the information flow back to a single breach point, Carlos harnessed the chaos like a conductor guiding an orchestra. His mind raced to comprehend the internal patterns, psychological warfare playing out in cybernetic form, knowledge from textbooks transformed into instinct, revealing skills he never fully acknowledged. Each decision shaped the immediate landscape of their fate, calling upon courage he had buried once before. "Map it out, and don't dare look away," Carlos urged, suppressing the urge to glance at Rick's face. Failure was no option, not after the discovery awakening deep seeds of self-belief. As data streamed in, an intricate web began to unfurl across the screens, one that gave him insight into the attacker's methodology. "This isn't random," he said, parsing through sequences. "They know our systems inside out." Unease slivered through him. Their attackers were not opportunists. They were calculated, targeting specific vulnerabilities, almost as though they had studied them for weeks. "Are we sure this is just a hack?" Rick asked, a crack of doubt rippling through his previously visible facade. Carlos swallowed hard. "No. It feels personal." The weight of understanding settled in, a notion laced with both urgency and horrifying implication. "We need to inform upper management. They must grasp that this is likely systematic." Rick hesitated, doubt creasing his brow. "What if—" "No. What if we don't?" The fiery retort burned Carlos's throat. It wasn't time for hesitation. He had come too far. "I won't risk what we know. We need to act decisively." Unexpectedly, Rick responded with a nod, brimming with newfound respect. Carlos realized he'd eclipsed the reluctant role of an assistant. He was now partner and equal. They began to formulate their communication strategy, piecing together a presentation that clearly outlined the attack vectors. Each entry was crucial, forming a narrative that was both alarming and empowering. With every passing minute, the tension in the air thickened, almost palpable, as they prepared to progress up the chain. The prospect of revealing the dire situation compelled Carlos to confront a gnawing question. What if his newfound visibility invited more scrutiny? A part of him wanted to recoil, return to the safety cloaked in anonymity, where his failures were merely overlooked. But a more potent voice emerged from within, the realization that every sacrifice was a testament to his growth. Before this threat, he had merely existed. Now he was claiming agency over his narrative. "Ready?" Carlos finally asked, timbre steady, the moment weighing on both of them. Until this point he had been fueled by necessity, but now he realized he was prepared to advocate for himself, to stand shoulder to shoulder with his colleagues, to leave the shadows behind. "Let's do this," Rick replied, his voice steady. Together they made their way to the management floor, the weight of responsibility heavy upon them. As they reached the door, it swung ajar, revealing the encroaching tide of looming threats ahead. Carlos took a breath, pushing past the threshold, ready to redefine his space. But all he could think was this leading them to greater danger? The answer lay ahead, hidden within the convoluted strings of technology and human action. This collision course into unknown territory would forge not only their professional destinies, but force Carlos again to wrestle with the crux of his identity. Would his first stand lead to the breakthrough he so desperately sought, or would he face the fraying edges of exposure? In the dim light of the corridor, their next move darkly glimmered ahead, pulling Carlos deeper into the heart of the storm. The atmosphere in the management conference room was thick with anticipation, as Carlos and Rick stepped inside. Faces lined against the long table turned toward them, expressions momentarily frozen in curiosity, before a veneer of professional detachment took hold. He felt a tremor of self-doubt, a stark reminder of the gulf that separated him from the executives who occupied these high-backed chairs. Were they prepared to listen, or would this be just another moment of dismissal? Carlos squared his shoulders and took a deep breath, willing his racing heart to steady. This wasn't merely about presenting data. It was about establishing himself as a competent voice amid a sea of experienced leaders. He gestured for Rick to begin, wanting to maintain a united front for as long as possible. The moment Rick opened his mouth to speak, Carlos recognized it, a rising tide of authority ignited by their earlier collaboration. "Thank you for your time. We face a serious security breach," Rick began, his voice unwavering. As he detailed the attack vectors, Carlos felt a rush of solidarity. The sense of purpose they had cultivated together was now firing through the room, but every fiber of his being ached with the weight of the impending confrontation. What if management dismissed their findings as hyperbole? The gathering of executives leaned in, eyes narrowing as Rick dissected the sequences they had gathered. Learning to articulate complex cybersecurity threats, the intricacies of human behavior, had been part of Carlos's uncharted development. Observing their body language, he sensed the flicker of concern in one executive's eyes as they began to comprehend the gravity of the situation. "So, you're suggesting that we are a targeted organization?" an executive said, his tone a mix of skepticism and burgeoning interest, as if testing the waters. "Yes," Carlos chimed in, surprising even himself with the steadiness in his voice. "It appears we're facing a systematic attack, not just an opportunistic hack. The attacks align with our unique operational vulnerabilities. This is personal." A charged silence filled the room, and for the first time, their attention was fully on him. The moment carried both a thrill and a weight as their considerations shifted. Would they see him as an ally, or just another junior employee with empty words? The realization dawned on him. This was a rare opportunity to assert himself, to step beyond the boundaries he had previously accepted. Rather than sinking back into the shadows of anonymity, he delved deeper. "In our current landscape, our reputation is at stake. Transparency with our stakeholders and immediate action is crucial." Another executive nodded, eyes lit with intrigue. "What immediate steps do you recommend?" This question shifted the dynamic entirely, thrusting him into the spotlight. Carlos had prepared for this, but now the moment felt dangerously real. "We need to escalate our security measures immediately and inform all personnel of the potential breaches so they can remain vigilant. We can't allow this to spiral further out of control." The executive looked around at his peers, who whispered amongst themselves, considering his suggestion. Carlos's gut tightened. This was a test of his newfound authority, and they were still judging him. Then Rick chimed in, bolstering Carlos's argument. "We have analyzed potential impacts on our projects and can redeploy resources strategically." Rick's affirmation felt like solidarity, uniting them as they faced the storm together. Yet, despite the moment unfolding in a way that Carlos had only dreamed, shadowed doubts wormed their way in. Had he groped too far to grasp authority? Could he defend his position if it came under scrutiny? The fear of failure lingered, weighing heavily as they continued their discussion. In the throes of this uncertainty, a flicker of resolve ignited. Empowered by the very tension that threatened to suffocate him, Carlos realized his internal narrative had evolved. The crisis, this unpredictable curveball, was an exertion of his agency. Whatever the outcome, a powerful shift had occurred within him. As the conversations grew fervent, Carlos found himself on the edge of a precipice. Could he truly carve a new identity from the ashes of uncertainty? The answer came entwined with the burgeoning tension in the room, crackling with possibility. But just as clarity seemed to emerge, a call for silence echoed from the far end of the table. An unfamiliar face stood poised at the entrance, an air of authority and intimidation shrouding them. What was his stake in this growing chaos? The sudden shift in the air left Carlos gripped with both dread and curiosity. The lines in the unfolding story had just begun to blur, and this new player sprinted toward unknown consequences. Who was this person, and what would they unveil? Carlos's heart raced as the unfamiliar face lingered in the doorway, its aura slicing through the heightened tension like a knife. The newcomer's sharp suit contrasted starkly with the casual attire of the teams in the room. He exuded an intensity that seemed only to amplify the stakes. "Who's this?" Carlos thought, the layers of authority and apprehension buzzing around him like electricity. "Gentlemen, I'm Carter Blake," the man announced, stepping further into the room. "And I'm here to understand the full extent of this breach. I heard there was a presentation regarding our cybersecurity concerns." His commanding presence transfixed everyone, and for a fleeting moment, the executives shifted their focus entirely to him. Carlos felt his sense of agency falter. Until now, he had waded into uncharted waters with purpose, but this was different. "Blake, the product of high-stakes decisions, seemed to symbolize everything Carlos was striving to become. The undercurrent of doubt resurfaced. Would he still have a voice in the unfolding drama? Rick, perhaps sensing Carlos's inner turmoil, leaned over and whispered, "Just stick to the facts and directly answer his questions." His voice, reassuring in the chaos, sparked a flicker of resolve in Carlos. "Carter, we believe we are facing a systematic attack tailored to our vulnerabilities," he said, choosing clarity over hesitation. "Immediate action is essential to mitigate further damage." "Interesting," Blake replied, his brow furrowing slightly as he assessed Carlos's resolve. The scrutiny felt almost palpable. Carlos continued, fortified by the support of his colleague. "Our analysis suggests that transparency must extend to all personnel to prevent misinformation and panic. We recommend immediate communication with stakeholders, along with strategic adjustments to our security framework." Blake nodded slowly, but the scrutiny remained. "Doesn't that leave room for confusion? How do we ensure the line of command remains intact while we navigate this crisis?" Carlos felt the weight of the question pressing down on his sense of professionalism. Hesitating would only further expose his insecurities. "Our priority is the integrity of the organization. The current threat is a breach of not just security, but trust. A clear, unified message is key to ensuring everyone understands their role in this," he asserted, each word imbued with conviction. The executives subtly shifted in their seats, and for the first time, Carlos sensed a shift in the dynamics. Blake's expression softened as the executives leaned into the conversation. Curiosity piqued. This was his moment, one that could redefine his standing in this environment. The tide was turning, and it was on him to navigate the currents. Yet, just as he felt the ground stabilizing beneath him, Blake's next comment twisted the atmosphere again. "And what if this breach implies a bigger issue? One that requires not just a reaction, but a strategic overhaul?" Carlos's mind raced. The implication was profound. An overhaul would require not only quick thinking, but a total reevaluation of their cybersecurity operations. What else was hiding beneath the surface? "Then we must act quickly to gather comprehensive data across departments. This isn't just about protecting our resources. It's about safeguarding our reputation in the long term," Carlos responded, framing the discussion around comprehensive risk management. The room seemed to pulsate with energy as he articulated this broader view, pushing past his prior limitations. Carter Blake studied him closely. Carlos could feel the intensity of the billionaire's gaze, which penetrated him, as if gauging the depth of his resolve and insight. The stakes had never felt higher. This wasn't merely about cybersecurity. This was a crucible, a chance to redefine Carlos's role. Energized yet apprehensive, Carlos's thoughts spiraled around what this moment could mean if Blake saw value in his input. Would he finally break through the barriers set by his prior self? The thought invigorated him. But now, responsibility loomed like a specter, whispering questions of its own. What if Blake's revelations about the breach demanded more than he was prepared to give? The inquiry sank its claws into his mind, pushing him closer to a new threshold. As Blake's gaze shifted from Carlos to Rick, ready for more probing, Carlos felt a long-standing personal conflict electrify his veins. If he wanted to rise and evolve, he had to embrace the discomfort brewing in his chest. There was no turning back now. Carter Blake leaned in closer, summoning the room's attention. This might signify more than just a breach. It's time to dissect the flaws that brought us here. The air hung thick with anticipation as Carlos braced himself for revelations that could both shatter his newfound authority or elevate it to unprecedented heights. Would the transformation he sought as an individual be forged in the crucible of crisis? The question lingered as the room fell silent, waiting for the next revelation to unfold. Carlos noticed how the room's dynamic shifted, the air tense with expectation, eyes darting between him and Blake. The personal stakes had never felt higher. This wasn't just about the company. It was a defining moment that could carve out his identity as a leader or shatter it completely. Blake broke the silence, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If we are to uncover the systemic flaws, then we need input from every level of this company. How do you envision facilitating that? Carlos swallowed hard. This was it. This was his chance to bridge the gap between rank and transparency. I propose we establish cross-departmental task forces where teams can share insights and experiences related to security. Having a diverse set of perspectives will uncover issues we might overlook in isolation. Additionally, we could deploy a digital feedback tool for anonymous input on vulnerabilities, he suggested, his confidence building with each word. Blake's eyes narrowed, clearly impressed, but also evaluating. And how do we convince management and ground-level employees that their voices hold weight? It's vital to foster a culture of trust in this current climate. Carlos leaned back slightly, soaking in the moment and weighing his next words carefully. It starts with us. If we lead by example, showing that their insights are valued, we can start to rebuild that trust. A unified approach that prioritizes their involvement will reinforce our commitment to transparency. As he spoke, Carlos felt the shift within himself, a burgeoning realization that he could articulate his vision clearly under pressure. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about instilling a sense of ownership among his colleagues. Ideas flowed freely from him now, the tension somewhat receding as focus sharpened on the solutions he proposed. Trust and transparency go hand in hand, fostering an environment where employees don't just follow orders but contribute actively to our defense, he concluded, the finality of his words hanging in the air like a promise. Blake leaned back, nodding slowly. Interesting approach, Carlos. It appears you've not only identified the problem but are also capable of navigating a path forward. However, do you feel ready to spearhead this initiative? It will require immense dedication. The question struck at the heart of his self-doubts. Could he genuinely spearhead such a pivotal project? Executives were notorious for their confrontation, and working against deeply ingrained company culture would be akin to swimming upstream. But the fire within him flickered brighter. He envisioned the possibility of transformation, a path not just for himself, but for the whole organization. Yes, he replied, sensing the weight of his commitment. I want to take this on. The conviction in his voice seemed to resonate, capturing the attention of those present. Rick glanced at him, a flicker of support flickering in his eyes. This wasn't merely personal. It felt as if the very fabric of the company hung in the balance. Then let's set the wheels in motion, Blake said, an unexpected commitment igniting in his tone. As conversations flowed about logistics and departmental collaborations, Carlos sensed a shift in his own mental landscape. The fear and anxiety that had clouded his judgment started to part, replaced by a burgeoning confidence. He could steer conversations, propose strategies, and harness collective strengths if given the opportunity. But beneath this new facade of confidence and resolve lay an unsettling secret, a link to his past that still haunted him, reminding him of his past failures and insecurities. What if this opportunity was snatched from him just as quickly as it came? Would preserving the momentum be too costly? As we approached the end of the meeting, Blake signaled for a final word. Carlos, prepare your plan for the next board meeting. This may be a pivotal point for our cybersecurity strategy. The gravity of the statement crashed over him, igniting both excitement and dread. He had the chance to become a trailblazer within the corporate landscape, yet the shadow of prior doubts loomed heavily over him. With new determination bubbling just below the surface, Carlos took a deep breath. If he was to fight the demons of his uncertainty, he needed a foundation built on courage. Standing there, poised on the precipice of greater responsibility and inevitable scrutiny, he realized the stakes of failure had never been so real. As the meeting adjourned and tensions melted into future building discussions, one question stayed anchored in his mind. What price would he have to pay to truly transform? Yet before he could articulate a plan, an unexpected message popped up on his phone. The screen revealed a cryptic alert, drawing Carlos's eyes wide with urgency. Security breach detected. Immediate attention required. A sense of dread coupled with renewed resolve flooded through him. The transformation was only beginning, and the true test of his capabilities awaited just beyond the horizon. Carlos glanced at the message, adrenaline coursing through him. This was no mere notification. It was a call to arms. The weight of his new responsibilities collided with an instinctual urgency that demanded swift action. He excused himself from the group's chatter, stepping into a quieter corner of the office. His heart raced as he typed a message to the IT department, requesting immediate details on the breach. "Get ready," he muttered under his breath, the words morphing into an unintentional mantra. The stakes had escalated dramatically. No longer was he just preparing a plan for the board meeting. He was thrust into the thick of an unfolding crisis. As he paced, Carlos could feel the tension in his stomach knotting tighter. The semblance of confidence he had worn like armor now felt flimsy, tested by the reality of immediate danger. Every prior anxiety rushed back, the fear of inadequacy, the haunting failures he thought he had banished. How could he manage this situation effectively, much less command respect and belief from his colleagues? He closed his eyes briefly, envisioning the scenario. He needed to take charge, not as a hesitant participant but as a leader. The knowledge that others would rely on him inspired a shift within him. There was more riding on this than professional survival. It was also about rectifying his previous missteps, reclaiming his narrative. When he opened his eyes, the resolve was palpable. He would balance the urgency of the crisis with the leadership principles he aspired to exemplify. He hastily outlined a strategy in his mind, drawing on the collaborative spirit he had proposed earlier. It was time to foster the open dialogue he had envisioned, but in real-time crisis mode. The urgency called for immediate brainstorming sessions, and he would need to engage not only the IT department but also frontline employees who might offer crucial insights regarding the breach. Carlos quickly headed back to the meeting area, rallying his colleagues. "We've just received an alert about a security breach. We need to act swiftly and collaboratively. I want each department to convene for a quick response meeting. Let's pinpoint vulnerabilities and deploy resources accordingly. Everyone's input matters now more than ever." Surprised expressions flashed across their faces, but he sensed an undercurrent of urgency stirring. The fear of the breach resonated more deeply than any prior hesitations about his leadership. Rick's voice boomed from the side. "I can pull a team together from IT to assess the threat levels, but we'll need clear insights from everyone for vulnerability assessments." "Yes," Carlos nodded, tapping into the inclusivity that had been simmering under the surface. "Let's not wait for the IT response alone. We need real-time feedback from every level. Let's create a shared digital space for input, so no one feels their input is insignificant." As departments scrambled to gather, a sense of purpose ignited within Carlos. The grave situation outside of this meeting was shaping not only his leadership, but also his identity. He was no longer the underdog. He was the architect of a collective response. Yet, amid the flurry of planning, a nagging thought pressed at the back of his mind. What if the breach was something larger, something more insidious? Could this be a part of a larger orchestrated attack? His past experiences in the field whispered reminders of complexities he had barely survived. As the initial meetings commenced and colleagues made their voices heard, Carlos felt invigorated by the trust building around him. Still, the storm clouds of his self-doubt loomed larger with each second. He was treading on uncertain ground and battling the burden of high stakes without fully knowing if he could deliver. In a moment of quiet within the chaos, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The path ahead was convoluted and wrought with obstacles, but a deeper understanding of his capabilities flickered to life. What would it mean for him to thrive in this storm? Patience, focus, and a readiness to confront darkness were forging a new strength within. But there was still no guarantee of safety ahead. Would he falter again when a real challenge struck? The question rattled him, echoing loudly. And just as he resolved to focus on actionable steps, another notification blared on his phone. Critical system vulnerabilities identified. Immediate response required. This was it. Everything he had prepared for, everything he aspired to become was about to be tested in a way he had never imagined. Would he rise to meet the growing storm, or would the shadows of his past tighten their grasp around him once more? With steely determination coursing through him, Carlos surveyed the frantic swirl of activity around him. Teams began to converge while a tangible sense of urgency electrified the air in the room. It was a moment that called for clarity, resilience, and, most importantly, leadership. "Okay, everyone, let's settle down and focus," Carlos called out, his authority rising within the confines of his sharpened voice. He instinctively felt the weight of their anxious eyes on him, and rather than retreating, he stood taller. "We have identified potential vulnerabilities, and it's critical that we address them head-on. I want us to work collaboratively and transparently." As he laid out his plan, piece by piece, the atmosphere shifted. No longer did he feel like the overlooked custodian in the corner. He was commanding respect. His earlier doubts had been replaced by an acute awareness of the skills he had honed. Skills that were now vital for protecting not just the company's reputation, but also his emerging identity. "First, Rick, I need you to coordinate with IT to assess the immediate threats and secure the network. Let's make sure we can defend our strongest assets," he instructed, his voice steady. "Meanwhile, I will oversee a communication strategy that ensures every department is informed and involved." Nodding in affirmation, Rick leaped to action, and Carlos couldn't help but feel gratitude. No longer was he navigating these waters alone, but rather as part of a team that recognized the fight ahead. As the discussions erupted with ideas flowing like wildfire, Carlos felt the momentum grow. Trepidation had morphed into purpose. They uncovered connections between departments that had long been overlooked, revealing strengths he never knew existed within Neptune Industries. Each suggestion led them closer to resilience. "Let's utilize a shared platform for real-time feedback," Carlos chimed in again, as he was naturally drawn into visionary territory. The impulse to organize became his stronghold. Collectively, those previously unrecognized voices would transform their vulnerability into resilience, placing ownership in the hands of workers who often remained unseen. Little by little, walls of skepticism crumbled, and with each insight, Carlos felt a profound shift in himself. The reflections of doubt that once clouded his mind had dissipated like morning mist. He was taking ownership of his professional narrative, each word illustrating that he was not merely reacting, but leading, defending the company against the storm. "Carlos, I've got it," Rick called out, excitement dancing in his eyes. "We've pulled data on past breaches and have a strong lead on what's been targeted." Carlos felt a charge of adrenaline. "Perfect. Let's mobilize immediate investigations on those vectors and prioritize swift actions," he said, voice unyielding. Logistical challenges emerged, but with clear role assignments, trust began to knit a web of accountability. As talks transitioned from panic to strategy, the minute hand ticked inexorably closer to a pivotal moment. Carlos could feel anticipation coalesce, heavy and electric in the atmosphere. The stakes felt insurmountable, yet every member in the office breathed vibrancy into the plan. A sudden pause struck the room mid-discussion, signaling a new report could change everything. "The breach is more extensive than anticipated, and access points have multiplied across several systems," someone murmured, uncertainty rippling through the group. His heart sank, but rather than spiraling into fear, Carlos took a deep breath. Clarity washed over him like a cool breeze. He couldn't change the situation, but he could change how they approached it together. "All right, we need to focus," he commanded. "Everyone, let's regroup and reorganize. We've weathered a storm, but we can do what it takes to fortify our defenses." Emboldened by his own conviction, their eyes now radiated trust. He felt their collaborative energy propel forward. "Utilizing our combined expertise matures our approach. Let's shift our strategies, unite our efforts, and ensure every team understands their significance in this process." As they delved deeper, Carlos experienced an epiphany. He realized that professional identity is not merely rooted in past roles cast in anonymity. It springs from passionate engagement in the present. The volume of brilliant collaboration elevated him beyond the title of a mere cleaner. Finally, as hours melted away into labor, Carlos paused to reflect. This was not merely about preventing a company crisis. This was his journey. The commitment, endurance, and achieved recognition were signs of transformation. He envisioned Mia proudly speaking of her father's evolution. An empowered leader, fortifying their family's future and society. Through critical reflection, he had unlocked the true currency of corporate culture: courage. Each moment spent reshaping narratives transitioned him from a nameless figure to an irreplaceable contributor, a beacon for transparency and accountability. As they circled back for pivotal decisions, Carlos found himself at a crossroads. This was where he realized the summit of his struggle was not merely professional, it was personal. He was charged with directing not just policies, but shaping values nurtured in struggle. "Let's lead this company into a new era together," he affirmed, speaking to the team. As applause followed his words, Carlos took a step forward, shoulders squared as the weight of profound recognition landed thick on him. This moment forged his truth. He had not only met expectation, but had risen to be a harbinger of change. In those final spaces of shared determination, Carlos established himself as a leader, not just in cleaning, but in crafting a future fortified by accountability, vigilance, and relentless innovation. And as he walked away, he realized, "This is who I am now. I am not just cleaning floors, I am paving a path for others to follow." Do you resonate with Carlos's transformative journey? Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.